You're watching Discover DevTools, and this is level 6, where we're going to be talking about frames and the CPU profiler. As we saw in the previous level, you can speed up your web page by optimizing your network interactions. But sometimes the problem isn't your network interactions, it might be that you just have some slow code that's running on the browser side. To optimize that, you can use two tools we're looking at in this level called the Frames View and the CPU Profiler. If you're a gamer like me, you've probably heard of the term frame rate. This refers to the number of images that gets rendered on your screen per second. So if I have a frame rate of 30 FPS, or frames per second, that means there's 30 different images that are getting drawn onto my screen per second. And as my computer slows down, it slows the rendering time down, which means I might be getting less frames per second, and it might start to stutter. Especially as it gets below like 10 frames per second, you're definitely going to be able to see it. Even your browser has a frame rate, and it can be slowed down by things like JavaScript execution, rendering of your styles, and painting the rendered page onto the screen. This is where the Frames View comes in, telling you when and where your frame rate is starting to suffer. I've modified the event creation button, so now it has an animation whenever we create an event. Let's see if that has any impact on our frame rate. So I'm going to open up the Timeline tab and go to the Frames menu. We can record our frame timeline by clicking on the Record button here at the bottom of the screen. Now let's try adding a new event. We click on the Event button, try typing a name, click to add, and there's our little slide down animation. As new events fire, our timeline is updated, showing how long each frame took to render. The ones that are under that bottom line are around 16 milliseconds. If each frame is 16 milliseconds, you can fit about 60 frames per second, which is a reading that you see here on the right-hand side of our timeline. It says 60 FPS, or frames per second. The second marker above this says 30 FPS, or 30 frames per second. So if a frame takes longer than 33.3 milliseconds to run, well, it's going to be above that line, and we're going to see this huge bar, which is not good. Notice at the bottom of the screen we have checkboxes with loading in blue, scripting in yellow, rendering in purple, and painting in green. These are the colors you see represented on the timeline. This page was already loaded when we started recording, so there's not much blue or HTML loading in our timeline. We do have some JavaScript, which we can see in yellow, and of course the purple is the rendering of the page, or the time we spent on style recalculation and layout. The transparent part of each bar is the time spent idling or on other uncategorized tasks. Low frame rates or laggy animation can lead to a bad user experience of an otherwise beautiful web page, so it's important to keep an eye on this. And so far it looks like our page here is loading under the 60 frames per second line. Let's switch to the next calendar day and see what happens. Whoa, you see that yellow bar over there? Not so good. Definitely less than 30 frames per second. The color suggests that JavaScript here is the culprit, but there's a lot of JavaScript in our application. To narrow our search, we're going to need the CPU profiler, which we're going to get into in the next video. But for now, why don't you jump into the challenges and get familiar with the Frames View.